Chapter 35 Outsiders Few forces on earth could ever hope to match the horror which was the outsiders, other-worldly beings who fed on magic and sought to end all that existed. They were not creatures that could be tolerated to exist in any stretch of the imagination. They drew their power from nothingness itself. They were nothingness given form, and they sought to destroy all that existed. Anything that went against their goal of increasing the vast nothingness could not be ignored. Those who challenged the void were quickly infected by madness or horror not belonging to their own world. Those who dabbled in the arts of void magic were by every definition of the law taboo. It was a sin, and one that threatened reality. Even among witches who regularly practiced abominations with joy, the void witch was seen as a heretic, even among the ranks of the witch folk. Her service was to the old ones, and in exchange she was given power. In time, her sanity and humanity were traded away, little by little. Yet all the same, her power remained. It bypassed most natural laws if used. Magical defenses were useless against it. The bizarre makeup of void magic required special preparation to counter. It drew magic not only from another world with different laws, it drew magic from a place which should not be. The void was a place of non-existence. As such, when it was given form, it could be reshaped and molded by the caster. It could create life forms and reshape to be harmful magic to all that existed. Even imagination seemed not to be a limit. It was no surprise that someone like the Void Witch quickly became renowned. She was not devoured by the void, nor did she make herself food for the outsiders. She drew from their power and kept her own. She mastered making bends in reality, opening doors to other places or other worlds. She had seen the great darkness and not fallen to the great madness. If the Void Witch was to be struck down, it would be when she was approached by the Witch Queen. The goddess found her and was more than her match. With the powers of a being who was part god, who now only grew in strength, she bore responsibility for putting an end to Malumbra. Hecate did not defeat Malumbra. She did not banish her to the void, nor did she kill her. Hecate was impressed by the abomination and offered a hand to the Witch of the Void. She served the witch goddess now, and her powers were comparable. Malumbra's name was lost to the void, so she gave herself a new one and was reborn with purpose. The task of uniting the separate covens was not so difficult. It was a simple matter, and Malumbra made the already imposing might of the Witch Queen that much more impossible to defeat. Malumbra used her abilities to bypass most magical defenses and killed rival witches. Curses and rituals seemed to have no effect on the Void Witch. Creatures like the undead or witch spawn had little appeal when the creatures of tentacle mouths and eyes joined combat. They were numberless and only required a way through one of the many portals made by Malumbra. Then they would eat, kill, and rage against all that existed. Malumbra kept them controlled and limited those tears in reality, where they could step through. Eventually, the void and madness must surely claim her. How long before she became the very thing she summoned? Coven after coven fell to her and her newfound giver of purpose. No matter how much the other witches begged, Hecate allowed Malumbra to exist. Isidora watched as her coven changed. She preferred to look back fondly on the covens as they should be. There were simply some magics that should not be practiced. Even her own power over death was a minor offense when compared to the workings of Malumbra. Isidora pleaded with the Witch Queen many times, but the deaf ear and constant absence spoke for itself. Mortals gathered in such numbers and were forced to breed. She used rituals cast on the children to ensure more witches were made. Isidora understood such methods were effective. She even used the soft-hand approach the goddess taught her. She understood the true value of deception. Isidora was taught many things by Hecate, and even lesser witches were impressed by the effectiveness of Hecate's ways. Because of Hecate, the very idea of witches changed. Overly ambitious methods spread like wildfire, and over the course of a few decades, the sudden shift became obvious. The wars of the world hid their growth. Isidora could see the potential they had, but all the same, staying hidden always. She even admired Hecate taking witches by the hundreds worldwide and creating a grand coven that by itself numbered close to 1,000. Borders were overstretched, and small colony covens had to be sent out. Hecate allowed and even encouraged other witches to take a dozen witches and go elsewhere. Using Hecate's methods, they would grow at an uncontrolled rate. Eventually, they would rejoin the Grand Coven. When the time came for Isidora to make a choice, although she admired Hecate and her power, she saw what was happening. It took a witch who mastered death to value life. The way things were going indicated witches should not be under one united front. They should be spread out throughout the world. They should not be practicing the arts of the void. It should never have been allowed. Breeding armies of witches and enslaving the masses was not sustainable. They did not have enough food or land. The bog was just one sign of many. The more witches spread, the more likely the world would become one run by Hecate. A world where blasphemy would be allowed and the end of life would become a very real threat. Isidora could not be part of the Grand Coven. Not any more. What changed everything? Abigail. She did not want her child to grow up in a land made by Hecate. She took who she could, making haste to the outskirts of whatever uninhabited wood she could. With the size of her coven, it was easy to take it from the Fae, but she made certain they did not overstep their bounds. She kept to tradition and simply chose to live in solitude with her fellow coven. They would stay hidden from Hecate. They would put up all manner of wards and preventative magic to avoid being found. Her sistren more or less agreed. It would be better to remain hidden and put aside the Grand Coven's ways. All the same, they knew their time would one day be up. Isidora accepted that she would one day die as the matron of death. One thought lingered: Abigail. She wanted her daughter to be a proper witch, a true lit witch who lived in the forest, away from void magic. Abigail grew strong and powerful. She was crafty and would no doubt make her way. Isidora had forgotten why she made this coven. She forgot her time was limited. She grew stagnant and was betrayed. But at least she would die as a witch should. She would die teaching her little one as she saw fit. She did wish she had a little more time before humans pushed her to this. After she fled, that would be it. There would be no more of her coven. A sad but realistic expectation. Hecate would no doubt send her forces soon, even if they fled. Where could they hide? She chose to abandon contact with Hecate's coven and live in solitude as the leader of a small coven. She would have accepted it if she believed humans would be the one to finish her. It seemed right to her somehow that mortals should be the ones to bring a witch down. Still, things weren't so written in stone that she gave into despair. She simply needed to prepare a lesson for the mortals. The ward was being perfected. The mortals would be stricken with a great madness should they get too close. In addition, her daughter's warnings caught her mind off guard. Would this even work? What sort of help did the mortals have? Was there some way she could warn them about Hecate? No. She had been bound never to directly oppose the goddess. She could not aid the mortals, nor could the changelings. Her eyes narrowed as she worked on a magical ward with a triad of witches. The changelings, the ones we used to cover up murder, perhaps they betrayed us. It made sense. She had no idea how they could get a changeling to reveal itself or break the binding magic the witches placed upon them, but at the same time it might explain the success of the witchblades in the forces of Xing. She had not considered the possibility of betrayal. Hecate had. All the same, it did not matter now. She needed to finish the ward. She needed to assume the mortals knew about them. Knowing and countering were two different things, of course. They had numbers enough and the witch spawn. Her undead would supplement all forces, and her ghosts could at least impede their advance. She nearly perfected the ward. It wouldn't be much longer. Hopefully, Abigail had managed to slow the advance of the mortals. She was clever and would use her youth. With her familiars and cunning she would no doubt delay them. She was wise enough to run as well. A true witch, Isidora was proud of her in her own way, but disappointed in other ways. But then a feeling struck her. Her child was suddenly racked with pain. Isidora did not feel pain herself. She just knew. It wasn't magic. It was simply instinct. Her young one was simply in pain. The corpse-looking woman did not let herself be distracted by her work, but her focus shifted slightly to her surroundings. What was happening? To her surprise, it was nothing. None of the wards were alarming the witches. Their magical senses worked and would constantly alert them, unless it was deactivated. She felt out to see if she could sense her wards. She could not, but then she supposed it was a considerable distance. There it was again. Pain for her child? Isadora exhaled a breath and finished working on the ward. At last she was done. She stepped away from it and walked towards her bones. She grabbed a handful of teeth and tossed them into a bowl. She looked at them carefully. The signs weren't good. She cast them again, asking them more specifically about her wards to the southeast. The bones rolled poorly. She cast the bones, mentally asking about the state of her daughter. The bones rolled poorly once again. Based on where the teeth landed, she knew that much. She cast the bones again, asking the question out loud. What is the state of the outpost to the southeast? The bones rolled very poorly. She squinted and had to make sure she saw true. What is the state of the outpost to the north? The bones rolled well, better in fact than anything else. What is the state of our defenses to the south? The bones rolled poorly. There was no mistake. The wards were somehow not going off. How could this be? Was there no uproar amongst the witches? Are there still wards against Hecate? The bones rolled well. There was still plenty of protection to keep the goddess at bay. But she had to wonder another question. Are the mortals getting help from Hecate? The bones rolled very well. Almost certainly. Isadora thought to herself, pacing bit by bit and finally taking up the bones one more time. Has Malumbra been sent to us? The bones rolled very well. She had. Isadora knew for certain that Malumbra would be upon them. The Grand Coven was coming for them. She considered. How best to act? She could not ask the bones about the true future, only the odds. Has Abigail been captured by the mortals? The bones rolled very well. No, it could not be. Her daughter, taken. How was she not dead? Perhaps Abigail pretended to be in a cage so that she could strike them. No, they somehow knew she was a witch and captured her. Isadora went to her pile of bones and readied herself. She was tired after using so much magic on the wards, but she needed to do this. "Sisters of the Coven," she called out, "gather yourselves and be ready to join the main encampment. Ready your sisters for flight and war. The mortals have somehow struck one of the encampments. Make certain the others are safe. Be ready." Chapter 36. Plans. The camp gathered, and Claire inspected their rather impressive quality as well as the number of enforcements. "I've never had a force this vast," she said to Meredith. Meredith was glad his commander pulled through. Darius was capable, of course, but he didn't quite expect this. Odds were that Darius somehow guessed things would turn out this way, or at least prepared for the possibility. He was expecting about 200, but received 400. Not just that, they were well armed. They didn't look like a group of mercenaries or lower guild hires. This was a combination of mages, healers, rangers, and armed soldiers. How did he get these guys? I mean, he knew some of the soldiers, but very few. Were they from the army or something? Sven looked them over as well, sniffing the air as he did. It seems they are taking the Coven as seriously as it needs to be taken. They are armed. They have knowledge as well. Kenson looked them over and noted one. Some of the markings are those of houses. These are most likely from the 12 families of Xing. Each represented a trade the city values, yes? They are normally kept for the personal use of the houses. How did he convince them to help? Claire looked them over. They are indeed from the 12 houses of Xing, as well as some hired help and some professional soldiers. Some of them have done dirty work before. This is good. The commander seems to have sent out 2 strike teams while we were waiting. He's very good. I would have sent more, but I suppose 2 is less risky. I don't doubt he'll be able to do some damage since they aren't expecting an attack. Soon their guard will be up. Morgan just short of marveled at the perimeter. The witches won't be able to take the town of Lorndrum back like this. It's too well defended. Even with the undead, I don't think they'd be able to push forward. Meredith found Scipio, patting him hard on the back to the point where Scipio had to cough. "You look a lot less dead now." Scipio looked at him, though his face was hidden by all the clothing around his face. Thick goggles covered his eyes. They were probably meant to hide his face more than protect it. "I feel a lot less dead. What's the situation?" Meredith briefly went over the whole situation. The guild, the weapons Darius gave him, and the ambush waiting for them when they first arrived at Lorndrum. Changelings were placed in towns long before this to cover up the disappearance of entire towns. In addition, they had been using changelings since Haikatai. There's no telling how many townspeople, like this one, might have actually been killed. They managed to get one of the changelings to confess about what happened, and he was more than willing to discuss what he had learned. He repeated what the changeling, Jink, had told him, as best he could. Then he went over the rescue of Mina, making sure to omit certain details, such as naming Sai as her master. Claire started to take over, giving him the fast version. We were ambushed at night. They focused on removing those who could use magic. The Moon Elves offered us temporary sanctuary and will join us in our fight. This is Selrith and Urindella. Both of them are skilled users of spellcraft and seem to be able to take care of themselves. Scipio nodded at them. Thank you for your help. As you can see, we've brought force enough to eliminate the witches. Arundella noted how Scipio covered his body, hiding whatever damage was done to him while he was in surgery or dying of dark dust. She took an interest in his condition and his hands. Based on where you place your weapons, you prefer a bow. Scipio was impressed. She noticed. Yeah, was a good shot. The last mission messed that up. Still, I can be of help. He wasn't wrong. He was still competent, and even sick, he could probably hold his own better than most. His skill with a blade was nothing to be ashamed of, but he was diminished, if he could but use his bow. Selrith gave a quick bow to the injured veteran. I spot my heart for men like you. You sacrificed much. Black Maw has taken your hands from you? Scipio nodded after looking at Meredith. Guess they knew. Well, it wasn't like anyone who knew current events wouldn't be able to make guesses. Arundella motioned to the woods. Black Maw is nothing like these woods. Elves and dwarves fear it greatly. But your actions put an end to a great conflict. Be glad it's over. For now, let us turn our eyes to the kin of witches. They've been left unchecked for far too long. Claire looked to the forest. It seemed that one of the teams was returning. The first to return was Augustana, a woman of radiance, her hair gold and eyes shining without pupils. She was beautiful as well, but Claire was most interested in the magic within her. She was empowered by the gods, a paladin no doubt, one who took full advantage of faith and the might of the 8 gods. In truth, she was far more dangerous than Meredith or Scipio. She approached, embracing Meredith, hugging him and speaking to him as they hugged. I had worried for you. Blessed be those who kept you safe. Selrith smirked. You're welcome. Augustana looked to him. Elves aid us. You are most welcome. The first of the witches' outposts have fallen. We should be hearing from Darius soon. Personally, my company struck down 2 witches. They were not powerful. Another fled. The prisoners are with us. They need water most of all. Food, it seems, they've had only in small amounts. Those who were imprisoned by witches looked tired and withered, but at least they were free now. They had their lives and they had time to grieve for what was taken from them. Some lost children, others lost husbands or their wives were beaten and mutilated to serve as breeding stock for witches. They all had stories, but for now they had one destination, the river. They went and were met by Mina, who summoned up clean water from the river instantly, purifying it in large amounts. Sai began readying places for them to lie down should they have been injured. Darius was right to rescue them quickly. There were only a small party of people now, but it would have been overwhelming to receive them all at once. They could ready a cart or 2 and take them to Xing temporarily. Soon after them came Darius, whose party killed as many as 3 witches. The prisoners were freed, and apparently Darius had gone so far as to capture a young witch, a clever one who had tricked many. They recognized her immediately as Abigail. Luckily, Mina did not see her just yet. Her leg was injured and she had to be carried. Darius was correct in his strike on her leg. It would not be easy to move that leg. Darius dropped her, rather uncaringly, in front of the witch hunters, yelling back to his men, "Get the prisoners water and medicine. Send them to Xing. If no one else will take them, you have permission to use the Gauss Manor estate. We can sort out where they will go from there. Keep them outside on the grounds, if you have to. Something temporary, until their homes are free of the witches." Odds were he wasn't going to let them run amok inside the manor. But even a place in Xing where they could stay free of charge would do. They could probably set up tents or something outside until all the witches were gone. It was vastly better to be in Xing than these woods. If nothing else, there would be other shelters who would take them in shing. Darius's gesture would lightly force others into being generous, but Darius didn't intend to make idle charity. He intended to deal with the problem at once. Letting them have their homes back would be best, even if now they didn't want their own homes anymore after this incident. Getting the town functional wouldn't take long. He intended to purge the witches, and Abigail was going to help him. He slid her in front of the witch hunters. Abigail looked around her. The eyes of hatred were upon her. If she did not make use of clever words she would be torn apart. She could not expect mercy, not even from Mina. She took notice of the witch-blades who glanced her way. "She's quite young for a witch, yes?" Kenson was curious about how she had developed such magic powers so quickly. Sven eyed the small one. "This little one is tricky. It would be best to cut her throat and take no heed of her lies." Abigail gulped but said nothing. Not at first. She let the silence stew before she began her retort. "I can help you. You just don't know it yet." Her eyes went to the camp and she realized something. Her mother was doomed. A force this vast, this well equipped, they could not win with trickery alone. Meredith pointed a weapon at her. "How can you help us?" The little one looked to Darius, but it seemed even he wasn't convinced that she should live. The fact she was a child had no impact on his decision. She would either be useful or dead. Better to be dead and not report any secrets back to the coven. She had already seen much, but he doubted whatever she would tell Isadora at this point would be very much use to Isadora. Abigail began by saying something useful. "They're preparing a ward, one that will drive men mad should they enter it. After that they intend to flee." Claire approached, raising a hand to Meredith. She looked the child over and considered her. It was as if Claire evaluated every aspect of the child's potential worth. "You are the daughter of a powerful witch. Which one? Isadora?" Abigail did not answer, but the look on her face was enough. Claire was correct. Who was this woman? Claire inhaled smoke and closed her eyes while thinking slowly and carefully about her next words. As she exhaled she came up with a plan. "This one is valuable. If she is Isadora's daughter, doubly so. We can use her to find the matron and kill her. Without her leadership, the other witches will be easy pickings." Darius began making assumptions. "Isadora is this coven's leader, then?" Claire looked at Darius and smirked. She asked her question almost as if it was a statement. "You are the one who leads this group of men?" It was at this moment that Morgan approached respectfully. "Thank you for coming. I am the leader of this guild's party. We can join your—" Darius interrupted him. "Not any more, son. Let the lady speak. Listen well and be mindful. She is a witch-blade. I am not. Her counsel on such matters exceeds my own." Claire eyed him carefully. He was certainly competent enough to know when he should seek out experts. He didn't seem particularly likable, but that was fine. Few commanders gave witch hunters the respect needed. She would have no problem with this man. "I propose you build a formation around the witches. Send a small elite group to kill the matron and disable their ward. Once Isadora is dead, I can give the signal and the remainder of the witches will die. Have archers ready to shoot down bats and familiars that the witches will become. Keep the formation tight to make sure none escape. The ward will have considerable range, but it should be safe so long as you are not in the main clearing up ahead. When the ward and Isadora fall, the undead and the main means of escape will be removed. She dies first. I can use the little one there. If you give me enough time, I can prepare a spell using her blood to get an exact location on her mother." Abigail felt a pained expression across her face. She was all too willing to betray her coven. She was practically a prisoner there since birth. Her mother being the matron, she was treated well for a time, but other witches became jealous of her and worried about her potential, since she still had youth and magic which surpassed theirs. She hated that coven. But her mother? Did she really hate her that much? Could she help these men and women kill her? She told herself she had no choice. She told herself that her mother stood a pretty good chance of escaping, but the more she looked around, the more she realized that her coven was doomed. Isadora would most certainly die now. Darius listened as Kenson and Meredith explained more and more of the situation. He then explained the situation involving the witches' outpost. Even though she probably could have done a better job if she were there, Claire smirked, impressed that a commander who knew nothing of witches ready to strike at a perfect time. Not only this, but he was also willing to use prisoners as a distraction to cut down a witch and kill the other two in their sleep. He did not fall for the little witch's tricks. He was most certainly going to be invaluable. Darius agreed with Claire for the moment. Yes, with the numbers we have now, it should be easy to surround a small group. Their outpost camps failing, and they will most likely pull back to the center. We need only clear a path to the center and surround them. Once we have encircled them, a team would be able to go in and kill Isadora. The plan was simple and effective. He preferred simple tactics to overly complicated ones. However, he kept a few ideas to himself. He motioned to the woman. "And who are you? I know you may be a witchblade, but could you lead a small company to kill Isadora?" Claire corrected her posture and pulled smoke from her pipe. "I have killed as many as 3 covens with considerably fewer forces than this. I have done more than any other witchblade. My hunts are always successful. I am capable of tracking particular witches and navigating their traps or wards. I will need Meredith, myself, Kenson, and Sven to name a few. I wouldn't mind having you as well in my group, but at least one of the powerful should be with the men to the south. They will prepare for an attack there." Darius considered the situation. "Scipio, you have command of the east side. Have yourself and Augustana march the troops to the most likely points of escape. We'll need to encircle them. Augustana, you will take the south. They will strike the hardest there. You are the most powerful of us. You will need to bring down the witches who attempt to break the formation. My men are strong, but they will need you to strike down the greater threats. I will command the north, the most likely place they will try to escape. Finally, I leave command of the west to—" He seemed to look over what options he had. One of the 12 houses? No, they needed an outsider or someone he knew. Someone who could keep some semblance of order and be able to take a witch on alone. The Wests would most likely have tricky witches, ones who tried to sneak out in the middle of the battle. Darius smiled as his eyes came across a candidate that suited his needs. The elf. "Your name, Moon Elf?" Selrith was surprised, but spoke softly. "A human giving command to someone of another race?" It wasn't just that he gave command to another race. It was that he was male. In his culture, the Moon Elves were a matriarchy. Females were the most powerful and influential. The fact he got a position equal to most women was rare. Arundella was his equal, but in his culture, she would be the safer choice. It was doubtful Darius knew this. He was a human commander, after all. If one were to see a male of high rank in the Moon Court, they most certainly earned their position, if they got there. Further, humans generally accepted male leadership more commonly. Of the choices of elves, Selrith considered himself the better of the 2 choices. It was a rare opportunity to be given glory of any kind in his long life. Darius looked the elf over. "Are you saying you're an unfit choice? These men won't care who their leadership is, so long as it is competent." Selrith did not refuse, of course. He looked at Arundella, who simply conceded this honor. She would have other chances, knowing full well he wouldn't get an opportunity like this back home. "Yes, I accept. Simply show me the men you would have me lead. I am honored that Shing would think highly enough of us to offer a station befitting the situation. Yes, I will shoot down all who escape. Arundella and I will gladly accept the offer. Moon hides you, Darius Urn." The compliment seemed to fall on deaf ears. Immediately forces began to move. Darius was not one to waste time. "Clear the way as best you can. Get everyone moving. We'll need to split up the groups as we walk. There's an opening and we need to take it. Once we make it to the clearing, we'll divide up and fan out. Claire, what signal will you give to attack?" Claire looked up to the sky. "The signal shall be purple smoke. It should be visible even in this light. It will not be hard to see. I will need to take the child with me." Abigail made one bargain. "One thing. Promise me that if I help you kill my mother that you will let me live. I'll live in Shing or wherever you want, but I want to live my life out, not as a witch." None was going to speak to this witch, but surprisingly Claire did. "Very well, little one. If you assist us and your mother dies, I will offer you my protection. I will let you live." The witchblade just made a deal with a witch? Very foolish. No one should make a deal under any circumstances with a witch. However, Claire did not seem worried at all. Darius frowned and his eyes narrowed. "You didn't need to promise her anything, nor should you have." Claire picked up the child and smiled. Perhaps, perhaps not, but the deal means nothing if her mother does not die. That's not the only problem, Meredith put it simply. She might not get off all that easy. We don't have the authority to offer her pardon for everything she's done. I know she's a child, but Claire's bird squawked and hopped over to Claire's other shoulder, making angry chitters. Claire gave it a touch, and when it quieted, gave it an insect to eat. It is that easy. I offer the child what protection I can provide, for her help, and she will help. Shing does not need to be involved. Do you disagree? Darius eyed her carefully. It seemed he was trying to consider his words. After thinking it over, he finally relented. I suppose there is some reasoning to what you say. Be ready with a signal. I'll leave the matter of her death to you. You've led 3 successful expeditions against covens after all. I have no reason to doubt your ability. Mooncourt, Augustana, Scipio, let me speak with you in private a moment. It sounded like there was some resentment in his voice, but then he did not like it when others made decisions without his consent. At the end of the day, it would not matter. Isidora would die, and Claire was no doubt a vital piece to use against the coven. He decided to let her have her way on this matter. He kept his other thoughts to himself. He had considered her and the situation and ultimately walked away to ready his men for formation when the time came. Separating them was not going to be a simple task. He needed to have a certain number of skills in every team. Dividing them up would be laborious. Meredith was surprised. He doesn't often let others have their way. Claire looked to Meredith and smiled. You needn't worry. I'll protect you as well when this is over. I'm still waiting to hear the rest of your story. Perhaps we can discuss more in a cabin after the mission is won. Meredith supposed he wouldn't mind another evening with Claire. The second time with a woman was often better. He agreed. Sure. She smiled, then looked to the forest. We need to make our way to the forest. We cannot hurry so much that we exhaust ourselves. We need to carve a path through the ruins and traps. Once the witches are dead, there will no doubt be another group who will clear out more from the witches. We'll need to be sneaky, and we'll only have one chance. Kenson didn't think they'd have any trouble. If we know where Isidora is, then it will be a matter of waiting until her guard is down. Sven growled. It is true, finding a witch undetected is most of the battle. But I doubt a matron will go down easily. We will need a distraction. Claire smiled, inhaled her smoke, and began walking. We have our distraction, whether you know it or not. Meredith wasn't sure what she meant. Then he realized. Abigail. Claire was going to use Abigail somehow. He felt a twist in his stomach at the realization of what she could do. Yes, it was almost certain she would threaten or harm the child in order to get her mother to do what she wanted. That was exactly the sort of thing they needed. All of Isidora's focus should be on her ward for now. Claire intended to bring Abigail into the camp with them. This would make the mission much more dangerous. He swallowed. Claire looked at him with a smirk. It'll be okay. I've thought of everything.